When this Indonesian official embezzled billions, he might escape human punishment, but not divine wrath and bitter curses. Once arrogant atop the cries of starving poor, now every breath he takes turns into a demonic scream, tearing him apart. In a small, dry, and dusty village, a simple stage stood adorned with a large banner that read, "Development for the Future of Our Nation's Children." On that stage, Rais Muljadi, an official of a public project, spoke loudly to the villagers lined up neatly before him, mostly mothers and thin, malnourished children with swollen, hungry bellies. "Believe in me," he proclaimed, raising his hand. "In no time, this village will be transformed. Paved roads, clean water wells, a new school for our children." The villagers clapped as they listened to his speech, though their hearts were full of doubt. Too many promises had come and gone like shadows. But no one knew that behind his neat suit and sly smile, Rais had already signed a dark contract. Most of the project funds, money meant to build roads and wells, would flow into his personal account through a series of fake reports and blank invoices. That day, as the sun set behind the dead trees, an eerie wind blew. Some villagers felt their hairs stand on end for no reason. In the distance, a faint sound could be heard, like a baby's cry. Yet they ignored it, thinking it was just their imagination, a trick of the mind after living in hardship for so long. They didn't know that on that day it wasn't just a contract that had been signed. It was also the beginning of a curse that would take every breath from Rais and turn it into an endless, unceasing scream. A few days after the grand speech, Rais Muljadi sat alone in his office. On the large wooden desk, stacks of project reports lay piled up, all filled with fake numbers and forged signatures. He took a deep breath, savoring his satisfaction. Public funds had already begun flowing into his account. Swiveling his chair, he gazed at the ceiling, grinning as he imagined the new villa he would build in the city. But that night something felt off. As Rais exhaled, he heard a strange sound. Not just an ordinary sigh, but something like a tiny scream. High-pitched, hoarse and full of anguish, like the cry of a terrified infant. At first, he thought it was just the wind whistling through the window. But when he breathed out again, the sound came once more, made louder, more real. Wah, wah, faint yet unmistakable, as if a starving baby were choking at the edge of his breath. Rais stood up and walked to the window. Outside there was only empty darkness. "No one, no baby," he laughed at himself. "Maybe I'm just exhausted," he muttered. But when he inhaled again, and this time deeper, the sound burst from his throat, echoing through the room. "Whoa!" The scream was so loud that the coffee cup on his desk trembled. Rais coughed, his eyes widening in terror. He clamped both hands over his mouth, but the sound still slithered out between his fingers. From that night on, every breath Rais took carried a scream. And with each scream, he felt a tightening in his chest, as though thousands of starving infants were crawling into his lungs. Rais didn't know. This was only the beginning, and the breaths that followed would bring more than just sounds. They would bring a living curse. Days passed, and Rais Muljadi began living in fear. By day, he forced himself to act normal, attending meetings, greeting his subordinates, signing false reports with a steady hand. Yet with every breath, the baby's cries still followed him, sometimes faint, sometimes so deafening that the people around him frowned, though none dared to ask. The nights were far worse. As Rais lay on his luxurious bed, the voices flooded in. Not just one. Now they multiplied. Every exhale released a new cry, the wails of hungry infants, hundreds of them piled atop one another, sobbing in unison from his throat. Rais held his breath. He clamped his mouth shut. He buried his face in a pillow. But the longer he stifled his breath, the more his eyes watered, his chest burned, and tiny sobs escaped from every pore. Even his own body had begun to weep. Unable to bear it, he rushed to the bathroom and stared at his reflection. Yet the face staring back wasn't his, but that of a gaunt old man with sunken eyes, sallow skin like paper, and a mouth hanging open in a soundless scream. The baby's shrieks echoed from the mirror, bouncing off the bathroom walls. Rais screamed, hurling a towel at the glass, but the reflection didn't fade. The old man remained, laughing at his own breath. And for the first time, Rais realized this wasn't just a hallucination. Something deeper, fouler had latched onto him, something demanding payment. Outside the window, the night wind whispered, "They're hungry because of you." Since that night, Rice Muljadi had been haunted by more than just the sound of a baby's scream in every breath he took. Now every time he exhaled, a foul stench spread through the air, a nauseating, metallic odor like spoiled meat mixed with blood. In the government office's meeting room, Rice sat in his chair, occasionally taking short, controlled breaths. He hoped the people around him wouldn't notice. But one by one, his subordinates began whispering, pinching their noses, glancing around suspiciously. "Is there a dead rat in here?" murmured one staff member. "I smell something." "Rotten," another replied, grimacing. Rice pretended not to hear, but cold sweat dripped from his temples. He tried to speak to divert their attention, but the moment he opened his mouth, a baby's wail burst out, accompanied by a piercing, putrid stench. Wah! The room fell dead silent. Everyone exchanged terrified glances. Some even shuffled away from Rice, as though something horrifying, something they couldn't see, but could feel, lurked near him. Clamping his mouth shut, Rice rushed out of the room, leaving behind an uneasy silence and hushed, horrified whispers. Outside the building, the hot afternoon wind carried eerie whispers to his ears. "You devoured what was ours. Now we breathe hunger into your lungs." Rice's heart pounded. He quickened his pace toward his car, but before getting in, he caught a glimpse of something in the rearview mirror. Dozens of small, grayish hands, baby hands, clutched at the air behind him, waving, beckoning him closer. No one else saw them. Only him. And with every breath he took, the crying grew louder. More demanding, more consuming. He didn't know it yet, but this curse was only going to fester. And the next breath wouldn't just carry a stench. The next breath would spread death. Since the incident in the meeting room, whispers about Rice Muljadi spread like a plague. People spoke behind his back. No one dared accuse him outright. But every time he appeared, that putrid stench followed, as if death itself clung to him. The rumors grew darker with each retelling. If you stand too close, it's like hearing a baby cry in your ear. The stench smells like an open grave. There's an aura of death around him. Now, whenever Rice entered the office, silence swallowed the room. No one sat near him. No one dared breathe the same air. One evening, as he stepped into the elevator, everyone inside rushed out. They'd rather take the stairs than be trapped with him. At home, things were worse. His once devoted wife, Indira, now watched him with terror. Their nights were thick with tension. She swore the house grew colder whenever he was near. "I hear a baby crying every time you sleep," Indira whispered, trembling. "Every time you breathe. I feel something touching my skin." Rice tried to deny it, but the moment he opened his mouth, a baby scream erupted, filling the room, echoing off the barren walls. Indira shrieked, dropped the glass in her hand, and fled the house in tears. She didn't return that night. Alone, Rice slumped into his chair. His chest heaved with shallow breaths. The infant's cries no longer came only when he exhaled. They lingered even in the silence. The air around him grew thick, as if crowded with unseen, starving spirits. When he glanced at the living room mirror, he saw his own reflection, but from his mouth tiny hands crawled out, wailing, writhing, begging for the meals he'd never given them. With every breath, the cries of 1,000 empty stomachs echoed, the screams of the phantom projects whose funds he'd stolen. The curse was no longer his alone. It had begun infecting anyone who lingered too long in his presence. That night, Rice Muljadi sat alone in his rocking chair. No more wife's voice, no children's greetings, no employees daring to approach, just the wooden chair's creaks, the whisper of wind, and the ceaseless baby screams escaping with every breath he took. His body began feeling strange. First, the skin around his mouth burned, as if scorched from within. When he touched his lips, he found them cracking like parched earth. With each breath, hot air mixed with infant wails seeped through these fissures. His body had become a chimney of suffering. Panicked, he rushed to the bathroom, splashing water on his face. But the water brought no relief. Instead, it turned murky and rancid upon touching his skin, as if washing away sins embedded in his pores. The mirror revealed Rice's transformation. His eyes sank deeper, neck veins bulged, and with every exhale, thin grayish smoke escaped his mouth and nostrils, settling on the ceiling like a deathly mist. Yet worse was to come. From within his body, he began hearing chaos. No longer just baby cries, but the hungry howls of countless tiny voices. as if hundreds of tiny creatures struggled to escape his flesh. Rice clutched his burning chest, feeling embers scorching his stomach and lungs. Yet no matter how hard he pressed, the agony persisted. He tried to pray, but every uttered prayer transformed into starving infant sobs, echoing through the room. In his despair, Rice noticed something new. His shadow on the floor now showed a grown man's silhouette covered in tiny hands pulling him downward. Even his own shadow had begun betraying him. Night passed, but Rice Muljadi dared not sleep. He sat hunched in a corner of his living room, trembling in the darkness. The air hung thick around him, rancid and putrid like freshly turned grave soil. Each breath he took now carried more than just a baby's scream. Something far more terrible. When Rice attempted a deep inhale, a small figure tumbled from his mouth. The creature crawled across the floor with its tiny, emaciated gray body. Its eyes were enormous, empty, and pitch black. Not one, not two, dozens. With every exhale, Rice gave birth to these starving things. Malformed infants with grasping hands, gaping mouths and ear-splitting, hoarse wails. "We're hungry. We want to live. We died because of you." Their cries mixed with choking sobs, flooding the room. The floor writhed with the small creatures, crawling up his legs, clawing at his pants, scaling his body. Rice tried to bat them away, but the tiny hands multiplied. For every one he threw off, 3 more appeared. They kept crawling, leaving behind rotting black stains on his skin, as if dragging his sins to the surface. Rice's face turned ashen. His body grew frail, patches of skin sloughing off to reveal quivering, wet flesh beneath. He stumbled toward the front door, desperate to escape. But the creatures scuttled faster, twisting around his ankles, sending him crashing to the floor. On the cold tiles, Rice realized the truth. Each breath he took was now a new contract. One more creature born, one more scream added to the world, one more curse binding itself to his flesh. From the shadows a whisper echoed. "Every coin you swallowed was a breath you stole." Rice Muljadi crawled across his living room floor, gasping as he tried to dislodge the small creatures clinging to his body. With every ragged breath, new horrors were born. Faceless gray infants wailing ceaselessly, crawling toward him with crusted skeletal hands. His home's floors had become a living sea of hunger, the creatures flowing outward in all directions, surrounding Rice, replacing clean air with the stench of decay. In desperation, he dragged himself toward the ornate hallway mirror. He wanted to see himself one last time, the proud man he'd been, celebrated by the people, respected by his peers. But when he looked into the mirror, he didn't recognize the face staring back. That ruined visage wasn't his, just a rotting flesh mask, cracked and oozing, with a yawning black void where his mouth should be. From that abyss, infant screams poured forth, an endless well-vomiting, ceaseless hunger. His eyes were sunken pits, his body horrifically emaciated, ribs protruded like they might tear through his parchment skin. His hair fell in clumps, his flesh scaled and peeling, his entire form resembling a pus-soaked rag draped over infected wounds. He wasn't human anymore. He was the physical manifestation of his sins, a walking curse upon the world. And behind him, in the shadowed corners of the house, the small creatures were growing, transforming into child-sized silhouettes with screams that cut deeper, louder, more agonizing. "We are the breaths you stole. We are the lives you sold. And now we will consume you." Terrified, Rice stumbled backward, but each retreat only made his reflection more monstrous. Unraveling, melting, becoming a mass of starving infant faces fused together. Rice Muljadi no longer existed. Only this thing of foul breath remained, a being whose sole voice was the endless crying of hunger. Rice Muljadi could no longer remain in his home. The house had become a cavern of death, overflowing with screams, wails, and the gray creatures birthed from his every breath. With a half-rotted body and faltering steps, Rice staggered into the streets seeking help. Yet his mere presence plunged the village into dread. People fled at the sight of him. Children wept without cause. Stray dogs howled before scattering into the darkness. Even the air around him transformed, thick, damp like inhaling death itself. Those who accidentally crossed his path collapsed coughing, as if invisible hands were stealing their breath. The rumors spread swiftly. "Something unholy walks our streets. Everything he touches rots. Stay back or your breath will freeze in your chest." The villagers made their decision. Rice must be banished. One night, dozens gathered with torches and machetes, cornering him on a narrow path at the village edge. None dared approach too close. The stench radiating from Rice's body was overwhelming, and every breath he took spawned horrific screams that turned their blood to ice. Without words, only with terrified, hate-filled stares, they pelted him with stones, wood, and mud. They drove him from the village like an unwanted specter. Rice stumbled into the forest, leaving putrid footprints in his wake. With each step, the earth cracked and vegetation withered. When he glanced back, he understood. No one would remember him now. The name Rais Muljadi had been scrubbed from Project Plex, struck from census records, erased from government documents. He'd been erased from the world, just like the projects he'd swindled. Alone in the dark woods without home or family, accompanied only by the starving creatures spawned from his breath, Rice realized one terrible truth. His breath no longer belonged to him. It had become a prison built by his own hands. Lost in the wilderness, Rais Muljadi staggered aimlessly. His body continued decaying, skin sloughing off, bones protruding, thin fishy-smelling smoke seeping from every pore. His breaths no longer just birthed infant screams. Now they took form. The creatures grew larger, resembling twisted, filthy infants with hollow eyes. They encircled him, crawling, shrieking, weeping. But this time, their cries carried whispered words. You consumed what was ours. You sold our futures. Now you shall become us. Rice collapsed to his knees in the muddy earth, gasping. Each inhalation stabbed his chest like his lungs were tearing apart. Every exhalation transformed him, piece by piece. His fingers elongated, nails blackening and curling. His skin turned purplish gray. His eyes slowly lost color, leaving only dark hollows of emptiness. The small creatures began climbing over him, swarming his body, gripping him, dragging him down into the cold, wet mud. Rice tried to scream, but no sound came. Only infant wails, hungry cries that no longer came from his lungs, but from his very soul. In agony, Rice felt his body dissolving into the muck, merging with the filthy earth, becoming part of the rotting roots of dead trees, transforming into the final breath that would forever echo through these woods. He had changed. He was no longer human. He had become the curse itself. Henceforth, any who dared enter these woods would smell the stench of decay, and hear, faintly carried by the wind, the hungry cries of infants, rising from the earth where Rice was buried alive, by the weight of his own sins. Months passed since Rais Muljadi vanished into the forest, yet the village where he once lived never knew peace again. At the forest's edge where Rice breathed his last as a man, the land itself began to change. Grass withered overnight. Trees dried up and collapsed one by one, their roots rotting from within. Birds and animals avoided the area. No living creature dared approach. The villagers whispered, giving the place a new name, the Forest of Dead Breath. They said those who ventured too close would hear strange sounds, the whimpers of infants, the choked sobs of starvation, or a labored breathing that pierced straight to the bone. A reckless hunter who once entered returned pale and trembling. I heard a baby crying inside my own chest, as if my breath had turned to weeping. He never set foot in those woods again. From then on, no one dared cross the forest's boundary. They built wooden fences and posted signs. Keep out! This land is cursed. The village slowly emptied, its people fleeing in fear, not just from spiritual corruption, but from something physical in the air. And on certain nights when the wind blew from the forest's direction, the remaining villagers would hear it, faint carried on the breeze, the hungry wails of infants mixed with the stench of foul, unending breath. They knew Rais Muljadi had never truly left. He was still there, breathing, weeping, cursing, waiting, and anyone who dared betray the people would one day find themselves breathing the same air he did.